We are in Salt Lake City for Permissionless, and today I'm with Neil from Dawn.
Thanks for having me. Excited to be here and excited to talk some more about this.
I'm excited to learn about your project. Tell me about Dawn, like a little bit what it is, and then how you had the idea.
Yeah, so Dawn is a protocol for building essentially decentralized broadband. And the vision that we have is very similar if, the audience is familiar with like Helium Mobile and how they provide decentralized mobile service. Our aim is to do something very similar, but instead of providing decentralized mobile service, it's a decentralized home and business internet, typically in the category of fixed services. So I'd say it's kind of an idea that seems to be resonating a lot with people as a protocol that can provide some real value to people, because everybody knows what it's like to have an internet service provider you don't like, whether if you're in the US, Comcast, Verizon, right? These are some of the big names that don't necessarily have great NPS scores, but ultimately consumers don't really have a choice for how they get their internet options. And so
Yeah.
our whole plan is how do we provide people with a cheaper, more and more options for internet, and a decentralized network is a really great way to go about doing that.
I heard a little bit about this for the first time at Consensus this year. I was with Annie from Dragonfly, and he's very passionate about the project. Can you explain for everyone listening, like how it actually works?
Yeah, so the way that it works is based on wireless technology, right? Is our goal is to find a way to take people that have excess bandwidth. It doesn't matter whether it's me and my household. It doesn't matter whether it's an internet provider or a data center. There's like excess bandwidth all throughout here, right? Even upon, recording, when we're done recording this and we upload this, we're only going to be using a small fraction of the total bandwidth that's available here. And so the goal of the protocol is to leverage the latest and greatest in wireless technology to be able to take that excess bandwidth, again, doesn't matter whether it is, if it's a household, a business, wherever that is, and sell that and connect that to somebody else, whether it's somebody else in this apartment building, whether it's somebody else down the street, whether it's somebody else miles away. And so the goal is to essentially create a consumer-powered wireless mesh network where everybody can be interconnected and can buy and sell bandwidth as they see fit. And so I think the kind of interesting takeaway in how we think about it is, when I live in New Jersey, right, and my home internet bill from Verizon is $128 per month, but that same volume of data at a data center only costs them 50 cents. So how is it that the margin is so incredibly high? And the reason is because the infrastructure required to take it from point A to point B is so expensive. But wireless now gives us a new opportunity to interconnect people at a much cheaper price. And with a consumer or user powered network, which is what blockchain enables, you can now completely remove the CapEx burden of being able to provide service here. And so our goal is just to use, again, the new wireless spectrum and wireless technology that was released to interconnect people who have excess bandwidth with people that want excess bandwidth. And it doesn't matter whether it's a home or whether it's a business. We're going to create a future where people get much cheaper internet as a result, and it is all thanks to a consumer powered network.
Would this mean that anyone would be able to sort of like create their own internet provider? Like, what does that mean for the consumer?
Yeah, the most important thing is that it creates a better competition in the market. So you're going to get better prices, right? If you have more than one provider to choose from, the prices will naturally converge towards a more optimal pricing for the consumer. And you're just going to get better pricing. And the second piece that I think the consumer powered network enables, especially with the blockchain and all of the stuff that comes with it, is transparency. Is right now, if you're buying, a gigabit from your internet service provider, you don't really know if you're going to get a full gigabit. You don't even really have any recourse if you get poor service. You can call and complain and maybe you'll get a refund, but that's just ultimately due to a lack of transparency and a lack of, again, clear communication to the consumers. So a user-powered network gives, two major things. It gives cheaper internet and it gives more transparency in that approach.
Is this something that people can go out and like use right now?
They will be relatively soon. So we are going to be launching the hardware that we're going to be selling towards the, I guess, end of the year, beginning of next year. People are going to be able to buy this and they're going to be able to share their internet connection with their neighbors. They're going to be able to buy internet from other people in the network that have access to be able to provide. So yeah, it's going to be very, very soon that we're coming up here. We just announced a fundraising round about 2 months ago that was led by Dragonfly. And, now we're in the process of building out all of the hardware, all of the protocols that we need so that we can go out and launch this towards the end of the year / beginning of the next year.
That's exciting. What's some of the differences? So as someone goes and purchases this instead of their usual internet provider. What's the difference in terms of like experience?
Yeah, the aim for the experience is designed to be as analogous as possible, right?
Okay.
A big focus for us is how do we make this so that it's self-install. So the idea of you having to wait days for a technician to show up, like we're trying to eliminate those days, right?
Amazing.
Yeah, you don't have to wait for the network guy to come show up and install that connection. It's something that you can buy, we can ship directly to you, or in the best case scenario, you don't even need any hardware and you can just activate your network and you're up and running.
Yeah.
And I guess, part of the kind of core thesis that we have here is in the pursuit of how do you bring Web3 into Web2 audiences, we want to make, the best way to get that done, in my opinion, is to have a very relatable project, right? Something that every household uses and every household has a home internet connection, right? And the idea in our mind is if in order to achieve that, we need to make sure it's a dead simple user installation process, something that is arguably more convenient than what users are familiar with. And so the barometer that we always use is, my grandma lives in Jersey City, right? We always use the barometer of, is this something that my grandma is going to be able to go out
Yeah.
and be able to install herself?
What are some of the challenges that they might encounter? Like, say, like something, a one-off thing, say, like out of 100 people, something goes bad. What would that be?
Yeah, I mean, the most important thing, and this is really where the importance on the blockchain side of stuff comes in, is we need to have maximum clarity about which areas can be serviced and which areas can't be serviced. Because the only time stuff really goes wrong is when there's a mismatch between what your data says and what you actually is the physical state of the network. And that is why it's important for us that we have these various proofs that sit on top of the network so that you actually know what is the physical state of the network. If you know that this transmitter is located here, broadcasting on this frequency, you can run predictive models towards being able to do that. So, in the worst case scenario with any of these types of networks is if you think you have coverage in an area, but you actually don't, that is obviously going to be a level of consumer friction that you want to avoid as much as you can. And so the goal on our end and the protocol side is make sure that there is incredible level of consistency between what is claimed as the state of the network and what is the actual state of the network. That way, when a user goes out and buys some hardware to start using this, they can have a high level of confidence to know that they're actually going to get service.
Yeah, have clarity of what they're getting. When I think of sharing my internet with friends or neighbors or strangers, the first thing that comes to mind is security. One of the scariest things one can imagine is, for example, you connect to open Wi-Fi and something happens. There's different degrees of bad things that can happen. So this would be like my main concern. Does that make any sense here?
Totally, yeah. And that's one that we had to engineer around, right? So every device that is in the network is ultimately using somebody for the backbone connection, but the underlying data, like your personal data, actually goes over what's called a WireGuard tunnel towards another data center. So the best way I can think about it is, or explain it, is it's kind of a lot like a VPN, right? A VPN is designed exactly to mitigate these concerns, right? If you're looking at buying a VPN subscription, the first thing they tell you is when you go to like an open Wi-Fi network, you can use this and get some level of security. Functionality like that is integral to the protocol and is built in, so every user is going to have that level of functionality to provide that level of security. So even if you're sharing your connection with your neighbors, you have no way of knowing what data they have or what they're doing with their connection as well.
I find this also like really interesting. It's a really interesting product for anyone that is in like real estate, right? Because you can provide internet like right from, I mean, when you're looking for a place to rent short term, if it has internet already, it's
Even better.
it's
Exactly.
even better. Yeah. So I'd see that like as probably one of your core users, no?
Yeah, and to like the part that I want to, impress to the audience here is, if you want to think about what is Dawn and what is this protocol looking to achieve, like our vision is just to do to internet what solar panels have done to electricity, right? The same way that consumers, real estate, et cetera, they own their own infrastructure, they get access to a very cheap resource and can sell that surplus back to the grid. Like that's the model that we're trying to pursue here. And so we can see adoption anywhere from single family homes to individual apartment units, and to your point, all the way to entire apartment buildings. And so the world that I like to see more is when the landlord, the building owner, actually owns this infrastructure in their building and is able to provide that to all of their residents, and they don't even have to think about that. It's kind of like when you move into a good apartment building, you're not thinking about electricity, right? It's just there working for you, and all of the billing and all of the experience happens behind the scenes, so you can just move in and get using, right? It's how do you actually turn internet into a proper utility, And I think a consumer-owned model is probably the best way to go about achieving that.
And as you make this product available, what are some of the areas in the US that will be the best to start using it?
Yeah, so I mean, our focus is going to be international, but in terms of the U.S., right? Like the reason, and I guess we kind of skipped a little bit over how we got to kind of their journey here.
Yeah.
Let me actually explain that a little bit. So, you know, I started a company called Andrina, which is a wireless internet service provider. So we actually teamed up with originally Princeton University and then other types of real estate owners, everywhere from public housing authorities. So we work like the Newark and the Jersey City and the New York Housing Authority, all the way to like Class A developers and even universities as well. And our goal was to tap into their excess bandwidth, or the bandwidth that was around them, and use their tall buildings to wirelessly beam internet to people in the surrounding area. And in the process of doing that, we have built a company, a Web 2 company that is now operating in 11 states, providing internet to over 10,000 households. And through that process, we've been building our own technology that makes our lives easier. And now we're actually going to be using both that technology and our network to be a launch pad for this entire ecosystem. So essentially, consumers are going to be able to buy the same technology that we have built in-house and we use internally to be able to grow and expand our network. And to your point about where we're going to be launching this, we're going to be launching this across our network for one. So we are live in the Northeast, Texas, Tennessee, Florida, and we're going to be using that as kind of like an initial launch pad for the system.
Okay.
But we're going to be using other internet providers' networks as well. We have 3 other internet providers that have lined up to launch Dawn on top of their networks as well.
Okay.
And these are across urban markets, right? I'd say urban was kind of our primary focus when we went and designed this protocol because, if you want to incentivize people to create coverage, you want to do this in areas that you can create a lot of coverage with just one node. And urban areas tend to have the density that make that a little bit easier. But as we have kind of gone and looked otherwhere, there's other companies that we're in the process of working with that allow us to actually use a Starlink connection and expand that Starlink connection using Dawn. So a good example is like this one company is looking at deploying internet connectivity in a school in Ghana, where the whole community can't afford, every single person can't afford a Starlink connection. But if a single school can chip in and pay for that Starlink connection, you can actually use Dawn to terrestrially expand that outwards. So, I'd say originally we had a big focus in the US and in urban footprints and also urban footprints internationally, but now we're looking at how can we actually go towards rural places where people really can't afford multiple satellite connections and they need a cheaper way to be able to expand that network across there.
No, that's amazing. It's really promising. I mean, the impact of that, if you bring internet to places that are less developed, you're essentially like providing them with tools that will completely change their lives.
Totally.
So yeah, that's really exciting. What other regions are you looking at?
So I'd say like everywhere from like Latin America, areas like Ecuador, Peru, all the way to, areas like London, areas in Italy would be pretty cool to deploy in. But along the west coast of Africa, it's really every major kind of urban metro area is like a great hub for where this is because these are the areas that have good subsea fiber optic cables and good data centers that you can actually use as like the backbone for connectivity to spread them out throughout the entire region.
What are some of the areas that this wouldn't be possible?
I would say the areas would be like areas where we probably never want to get involved in. Probably some of the more niche areas that Starlink I think is going to do a great job of covering, like RVs for example, or marine type applications, or like super rural that doesn't have any level of density. That I think is where you have like Starlink is going to reign supreme over the next 20 years as the ultimate technology in that type of solution.
How do you identify if someone is trying to be a provider but has bad intent?
That comes down to actually what we mentioned on the proof system. So, like the nice part about what the blockchain gives us is it gives us a data consensus layer. So everybody is kind of operating on the same ledger. But what you need on top of that is a network consensus layer. You need a way where if I'm giving you my excess bandwidth, you know that I'm not lying about that. And so that is actually an implementation that we did with a company called Witness Chain to build what's called proof of backhaul. And proof of backhaul, you can think about it as like a decentralized speed test. So you'll be able to know for a fact how much bandwidth I actually have to sell and how much bandwidth you're actually receiving. And that entire model, I think, is one that we haven't seen in the internet today, right? Like I kind of mentioned, when you get poor service from your internet provider, you just have to call and complain,
Yeah.
and it's just he said, she said about what the underlying issue is. But by building these proofs of the networks that we have, you can you can actually completely eliminate a big chunk of what the gaming is on the system. So to make sure that the value that people are bringing is actually a verifiable value, and that's an important part of why we're going about it this way.
What's a common concern when people come to you and sort of like counter this as a good way forward for the internet?
I think, oftentimes people are asking like, what is the future of wireless connectivity going to be like? And people oftentimes point to something like Starlink as like, what's the point of building new wireless when something like Starlink already exists, right? And the part that I kind of, refute with that is the performance that we need from wireless is we need something that can actually compete against the existing wireline services like fiber and DOCSIS and all of these sorts of technologies that provide high performance connectivity in the urban footprint. But the only wireless technology that can actually do this is terrestrial fixed wireless, which is what our protocol uses. So whether you're talking about 5G, whether you're talking about Starlink, they don't have the performance that they need to be able to do this and to be able to compete against fiber.
I see.
And so our kind of philosophy has been, is we all know it's only a matter of time until wireless is able to replace wires. And we are living now through the first time in history when it's actually been possible to do that because it's both performant enough to compete against fiber and scalable enough to offer close to 100x improvement in the unit economics of delivering this connectivity. So I'd say it's an interesting time in history where we're now kind of seeing this transition to a more wireless world. And don't get me wrong, technologies like Starlink are incredible. 5G home internet from T-Mobile and Verizon are also incredible technologies. But I think something like this allows us to offer a gigabit level solution that is also consumer owned as well. And that's what gets me really excited, is the idea of the individual consumer being able to participate in this new network and capture the value that they create in this new network is a very promising one.
Absolutely. It's really exciting. I'm looking forward to see how this plays out. When can people expect this to be out?
So that was, I kind of mentioned this in the end of the year, get ready for more updates about what we're building towards something in the beginning of the year where people can start getting involved. But in the meantime, the easiest way people can get involved is actually to download our Chrome extension. And the Chrome extension is one where people can actually use their spare bandwidth to be validators onto the network. So everybody is using a little bit of their spare bandwidth to be able to challenge people that are in the network to be able to be and hold them honest with that, decentralized speed test that I mentioned. So the more people that we can get on there, the better. We've already had, incredible growth on that side of stuff. So we just want to bring people that are more involved in the community, like obviously join the Discord. But the point that I kind of say, and this is, to the audience, is if you believe in the idea of a user-powered internet, one that is not owned by monopolies, but is actually owned by the individual consumer, come join us and come help us build that own internet. So, I'm excited to kind of continue going there, and the Chrome extension and joining the Discord community are the easiest way that people can get started right now, and then they'll get more updates over time.
Where can they find you?
So you can find us on Twitter. Dawn Internet is kind of our protocol's Twitter handle, and then mine is neilc_dawn. And that's the best way to stay plugged in about what we're doing, and you can learn more there about our Chrome extension and everything that we've got coming along the lines.
Really exciting. Neil, thank you.
Yes, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it.
Hey, what's up?
But it's not something Genzio is afraid of.
If you want to survive, you got to build a house.
No, we do not understand that we do not understand. Ladies and gentlemen.
We're back at the Genzio Media House.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for joining us today.